The year is 430 BCE. Dawn breaks over Athens, and the city is already awake. Stone steps are crowded with citizens, gathering not for worship or debate, but for observation. In the center of the polis, an open space meant for civic life has been quietly repurposed. Today, it will function as a warning. Guards stand in formation. Officials consult tablets. And those brought forward, most of them without voice, without standing, understand that what is about to happen is not meant to correct them. It is meant to be seen. Among the crowd are women whose presence is neither voluntary nor equal. Some are relatives of the accused. Some are captives taken through war or debt. Others belong to the lowest strata of society, legally visible only when their suffering serves a public function. They stand at the edges, controlled by law, custom, and fear, watching a system demonstrate its authority. The city itself became a theater where power was displayed and vulnerability was reinforced. This is the story of public games ancient Greece used to punish criminals, not as entertainment in the modern sense, but as civic performances where humiliation, exclusion, and fear were carefully managed by the state. If you are watching this through dark inquest history, you are already part of an effort to examine the systems history preferred to celebrate without scrutiny. Because understanding how punishment was normalized is essential to understanding how power maintained itself. Within the first moments of these events, the message was unmistakable. Justice in ancient Greece was not solely about law, it was about visibility. The crowd mattered as much as the accused. The lesson was not delivered privately, it was broadcast. To understand why these public punishments took the form they did, we must first understand the world that created them. Ancient Greek city-states were deeply stratified societies. Citizenship was limited. Political voice belonged to adult free men. Everyone else, women, enslaved people, foreigners, the poor, existed within boundaries enforced by custom and threat. Law was not neutral. It was an extension of social hierarchy. Punishment reflected this hierarchy clearly. The same offense could be treated differently depending on status. But one constant remained. Public exposure was a tool of control. These public games were not always violent in a physical sense. Often, their power lay in psychological dismantling. Individuals accused of crimes ranging from theft and religious transgression to moral violations were subjected to rituals designed to strip them of dignity. They were displayed, mocked, isolated, or symbolically reduced. The act itself mattered less than the message sent to those watching. Women were particularly vulnerable within these systems. While rarely framed as the primary subjects of punishment narratives, they were deeply affected by them. A woman associated with a condemned individual could be socially erased. Her standing could collapse overnight. In some cases, women themselves were accused of offenses tied to morality or ritual purity, charges defined entirely by male authority. These punishments unfolded in spaces meant for communal life: marketplaces, assembly grounds, festival arenas. By using familiar locations, the state ensured that no one could claim ignorance. The city itself participated. The games were governed by officials who framed them as lawful necessity. There was procedure, there were rules. This gave the appearance of order. But behind that order was coercion. Participation was not optional. Absence could be interpreted as dissent. For marginalized individuals, especially women and captives, the atmosphere was suffocating. They learned quickly that survival depended on invisibility. Drawing attention could be dangerous. Silence was safer. As these practices developed, they became embedded in civic identity. Citizens told themselves these rituals preserved stability, that they prevented chaos, that fear was a reasonable price for order. This is where the escalation begins. The first wave of these public punishments focused on shame. Individuals were positioned as examples of failure. Their names were spoken, their alleged crimes summarized. Their bodies became symbols of what happens when one steps outside prescribed boundaries. No physical detail was required. The emotional weight was enough.
The crowd's role was critical. Reaction mattered. Approval reinforced authority. Indifference signaled acceptance. Even discomfort served a purpose. It reminded observers that the system could reach anyone. The second wave intensified isolation. Those punished were often separated from community life afterward. They were marked, not always physically, but socially. Access to trade, marriage, or religious participation could be withdrawn. For women, this exclusion was devastating. Without male protection or recognized status, survival became uncertain. The third wave extended punishment beyond the individual.
Families were implicated. Associates became suspect. Entire households adjusted behavior to avoid attention. The lesson spread wider than the original offense. Through repetition, these games normalized fear. Children grew up witnessing them. Young women learned what transgression looked like before they understood why it mattered. The rituals taught compliance long before laws were fully understood. At the heart of these practices was a contradiction. Ancient Greece celebrated freedom for some, while engineering control over many. Public punishment reconciled this contradiction by framing oppression as civic duty. As we move deeper into this history, it becomes clear that these were not spontaneous acts of cruelty. They were deliberate systems, carefully timed, publicly justified, socially enforced. And yet, the official records rarely dwell on the emotional consequences. They catalog offenses, procedures, outcomes. They do not record the silence that followed. They do not describe the lives narrowed by fear. What survives instead are fragments, inscriptions, legal texts, philosophical justifications. Together, they reveal a society that understood the power of spectacle and used it. The people who endured these public games rarely left testimony. Their experiences were absorbed into tradition. Their suffering became background noise to history's grand narratives. This absence is not accidental. As these public punishments became routine, they evolved into recognizable civic rituals. They were scheduled, announced, sometimes aligned with festivals or gatherings already meant to draw crowds. This was not coincidence. The effectiveness of punishment depended on witnesses. Without an audience, fear could not circulate. Without repetition, authority could not be reinforced. In Athens, Sparta, and other city-states, punishment was carefully framed as participation in justice rather than an act of domination. Officials spoke of balance, order, and moral correction. Philosophers debated the nature of wrongdoing, while rarely questioning the structure of punishment itself. What mattered was not the inner life of the accused, but the lesson delivered to the city. One of the most common forms of these public games relied on enforced exposure. Individuals accused of crimes were brought into communal spaces and placed under scrutiny. They were made visible at a moment when visibility meant vulnerability. No elaborate spectacle was required. The act of being observed, judged without defense, was sufficient. This exposure was not neutral. It stripped individuals of privacy, a concept already limited in ancient societies.
For women, whose reputations determined their entire future, public association with accusation carried consequences that extended far beyond the event itself. Even when not formally condemned, proximity to shame could permanently alter their standing. Another form of punishment relied on symbolic degradation. Objects associated with honor, garments, tokens, tools of trade, were removed or redefined. These gestures communicated loss without physical force. They told the crowd that the individual no longer belonged in the same way. The punishment did not end when the event concluded. It followed the person into daily life. These games often blurred the line between justice and ritual. Religious language was used to justify civic authority. Offenses were framed as disruptions of cosmic balance. This allowed punishment to be presented not as cruelty, but as necessity. Resistance, therefore, became sacrilege. Women were particularly vulnerable to accusations tied to ritual purity or moral disorder. These charges were vague by design. They allowed male authorities to regulate behavior without clear boundaries. Once accused, a woman had limited means of defense. Her voice carried little legal weight. Her fate was often decided by reputation rather than evidence. The psychological impact of this system was profound. Fear did not require constant enforcement. Once internalized, it shaped behavior automatically. People adjusted their actions, speech, and associations to avoid attention. This self-regulation was the system's greatest success. As public punishments continued, they escalated in complexity. Some events incorporated competitive elements, comparisons between offenders, symbolic rankings, or timed rituals. These features reinforced the idea that punishment was a process, not an anomaly. It had structure, rules, outcomes. Yet beneath this structure was an imbalance that never shifted. Authority always flowed in one direction. Those subjected to these games were never participants by choice. Consent was irrelevant. The appearance of order masked the reality of coercion. For marginalized individuals, particularly captives and the poor, these events confirmed their disposability. Their suffering served a purpose beyond themselves. It maintained boundaries. It reminded citizens of their relative privilege. It warned them what could be lost. Midway through these practices, a deeper transformation occurred. Punishment began to shape identity. Individuals were no longer defined solely by their roles within family or trade, but by their relationship to law. To be punished publicly was to be reclassified. One became an example rather than a person. This reclassification extended to families. Women related to punished individuals often faced suspicion, withdrawal of protection, or forced dependency. Their lives narrowed quietly. The records do not describe this process, but its effects can be traced through marriage patterns, inheritance disputes, and sudden disappearances from civic documentation. At this point in the system, silence became a survival strategy. Speaking risked association. Association invited scrutiny. Scrutiny led to exposure. The chain was well understood. It is here, after generations of repetition, that these public games reached their most effective form. They no longer required escalation. Their power lay in memory. Everyone knew what happened. Everyone knew where they stood. If examining these mechanisms matters to you, continuing this work with Dark Inquest History is not about consuming dark stories. It is about recognizing how easily systems of control present themselves as tradition. As we move toward the later stages of this history, we begin to see the cost of this normalization. The city-states that relied so heavily on public punishment also struggled with trust. Fear undermined solidarity. Compliance replaced loyalty. The climax of these practices did not arrive with a single event. It arrived gradually,
as punishment became indistinguishable from governance. The boundary between law and spectacle dissolved. By the time these public punishments became indistinguishable from civic routine, their most powerful effect was no longer fear alone, it was predictability. The population knew when these events would occur, where they would take place, and what they signified. This familiarity did not soften their impact, it sharpened it. When injustice becomes routine, resistance becomes riskier, not safer.
In later generations of the Greek city-states, punishment no longer required explanation. Its meaning was assumed. A figure brought forward into a public space did not need a detailed accusation. Presence itself implied guilt. Silence from officials signaled that procedure had already been satisfied. The audience did not demand clarity. They had learned not to. At this stage, public games functioned less as correction and more as reinforcement. They reinforced who mattered and who did not. They reinforced whose voice carried weight and whose absence would go unrecorded.
The system no longer needed spectacle to shock. It needed only repetition to endure. For women living under these conditions, the consequences were cumulative. Even when not directly targeted, they absorbed the system's logic. They learned how quickly status could be revoked, how easily protection could dissolve, how association alone could place them at risk. Marriage, kinship, and reputation became defensive structures rather than sources of security. Choices narrowed. Silence became inheritance. Mothers passed caution to daughters, not as wisdom, but as warning.
This transmission of fear was one of the system's most enduring legacies. Public punishment also reshaped how communities remembered themselves. Official histories emphasized stability, order, and civic virtue. They celebrated law as a sign of progress. What they omitted were the individuals who disappeared quietly after being marked. The punished did not become martyrs, they became gaps. These gaps mattered. They altered demographic patterns. They changed labor distribution. They reshaped households. Yet because they were not violent in a way that demanded immediate response, they were rarely questioned. The darkest phase of these practices emerged when punishment became preventative rather than reactive. Individuals were disciplined not only for what they had done, but for what they represented. Difference itself became suspect. Poverty, foreign origin, unconventional behavior, all could trigger attention. This is where public games shifted from justice to control. The goal was no longer to address specific acts, but to manage uncertainty. Fear was used to simplify complexity. Rather than resolving social tension, the state redirected it. Crowds played a crucial role in this redirection. Public participation diluted responsibility. When many watched, no one felt accountable. Discomfort was dispersed. Moral weight was shared thinly enough to be ignored. The accused stood alone. The city stood together. For those subjected to these rituals, the experience did not end with the event. Reintegration was rare. Even when allowed, it was conditional. Trust was never restored fully. Suspicion lingered. Opportunities closed quietly. Women faced an additional layer of erasure. Their experiences were rarely named in records. When mentioned, they appeared as extensions of male narratives: wives, daughters, dependents. Their individual suffering was not considered historically relevant. Yet traces remain in legal debates that caution against excess, in philosophical texts that struggle to reconcile virtue with fear, in myths that warn of pride punished by the collective. These fragments suggest awareness without accountability. At the symbolic center of these practices was silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of calculation. People learned when to speak and when not to. They learned which questions invited danger. Over time, this restraint became culture. This culture had consequences beyond punishment itself. It influenced political participation. It shaped who felt entitled to challenge authority. It limited imagination. When fear governs behavior, possibility contracts. The climax of this system was not a single moment of collapse, but a gradual hollowing. Public games continued, but their meaning changed. They no longer unified the city around shared values. They unified it around shared avoidance. Those who vanished from the record did not vanish from impact. Their absence structured the lives of those who remained. Fear became a form of governance more efficient than force. It is here, at this point of quiet saturation, that the moral weight of these practices becomes hardest to confront. There is no single villain, no dramatic turning point, only a system that functioned exactly as intended. If this pattern feels familiar, it is because it is not confined to one era. History repeats its mechanisms, even when it abandons its language. Public punishment evolves, its forms change, its logic persists. As we approach the end of this investigation, one final question remains. What happens after a society grows accustomed to erasing people without acknowledging the cost? When the classical era of Greece faded and new powers absorbed its cities, the public games of punishment did not disappear through reckoning or reform. They simply lost their visibility. What had once been staged openly was folded into law, custom, and administration. The spectacle ended. The logic remained. Later historians described ancient Greece as a birthplace of justice and civic participation. They analyzed legal codes, political debates, and philosophical ideals. What they rarely examined was how order had been maintained when persuasion failed. The punished were reduced to abstractions. Their experiences were treated as necessary friction in the pursuit of stability. This selective memory shaped how the past was inherited. Punishment was remembered as procedure, not as lived experience. Fear was interpreted as discipline. Silence was mistaken for consent. For women and marginalized individuals, this erasure was complete. Their stories did not survive as cautionary tales or moral lessons. They survived only as patterns, restrictions in law, absences in genealogy, sudden shifts in social standing that cannot be fully explained by surviving records. The system ensured that their suffering left no demand for response. What endured instead was a lesson about power. That authority is most effective when it does not need to justify itself. That control is strongest when it is normalized. That public participation in punishment binds a society together through shared avoidance rather than shared justice. The long-term effects were subtle but lasting. Greek political life struggled with internal trust. Loyalty to the city often coexisted with fear of it. Civic pride was balanced by caution. Participation was encouraged, but only within boundaries that remained rigidly enforced. Public punishment taught citizens how to watch rather than intervene, how to accept rather than question, how to interpret silence as order. These lessons did not vanish with time. They traveled through law, through empire, through tradition. The forms changed, but the principle endured. When power is displayed publicly, it teaches obedience privately. Revisiting these histories matters because they challenge comforting narratives. They remind us that civilization does not progress cleanly, that systems praised for reason and structure can coexist with profound injustice. That absence in the record is often evidence, not coincidence. The people subjected to these public games were not anomalies. They were essential to how the system functioned. Their fear maintained boundaries. Their exclusion preserved hierarchy. Their silence stabilized authority. Remembering them now does not undo what was done, but it interrupts the final stage of the punishment, the erasure. It restores presence where absence was enforced. It reframes ancient justice, not as an abstract ideal, but as a lived system with human cost. The public games ancient Greece used to punish criminals were not designed to be remembered for their cruelty. They were designed to be remembered for their effectiveness. That is why examining them honestly is uncomfortable and necessary. Because when punishment becomes tradition and silence becomes normal, history does not end, it repeats. If preserving the memory of those history preferred to forget matters to you, continuing this work with Dark Inquest History is not about subscribing to a channel. It is about refusing to let silence finish what power began, by choosing to remember.